When I first arrived at Fort Ravenhill, the world smelled like dust, sweat, and metal. The sky hung low with clouds the color of dull steel, and the wind carried that dry electric scent that comes right before a storm. I had only been there for 2 hours, yet my hands already ached from gripping my duffel too tightly. I was 26, old enough to know fear, but young enough to still believe I could outrun it. Joining the army hadn't been some grand patriotic calling. It was more of a dare to myself. I'd spent too long drifting from one odd job to another, hearing my father's voice in my head. "You'll never stick to anything, Jony." So when the recruiter asked, "You ready to serve?" I'd nodded before doubt could form a sentence. The base looked like discipline carved into dirt. Soldiers marched in perfect lines. Boots thudded in unison. Rifles gleamed like mirrors, and every order barked seemed to strip the air of hesitation. I wanted to belong there, to stand tall, to silence the old voice that called me a quitter. But as I watched men twice my size sprint and lift and obey without a flicker of uncertainty, I felt like a misplaced piece in a machine. That was before I saw him, Sergeant Harris. He didn't need to shout to command a room. When he stepped into the training yard, conversations died naturally, like someone had pulled the plug on sound. He was about 50, maybe older, but his posture could have shamed any of us. His uniform looked lived in, not worn, creased just enough to hint at experience rather than neglect. Gray threaded through his cropped hair, and his eyes, a sharp, steady blue, held the kind of calm that comes from surviving more than one storm. When those eyes swept over me for the first time, I forgot how to breathe. "New recruit?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Jony Reed." His gaze lingered, not unkindly, just assessing. "You ever handled a rifle before, Reed?" "Once, at a range." One side of his mouth lifted, but it wasn't a smile. "You'll get plenty of practice." Then he turned away to address the unit, his voice low but carrying like thunder beneath the skin. There was no shouting, no bravado, just the kind of authority that made you want to listen. I caught myself watching the way his shoulders moved when he walked, the steady rhythm of command in his stride. By the end of that first day, I was exhausted. My arms burned from drills, my throat tasted of dust, and my pride had taken at least 3 direct hits. But every time Sergeant Harris called an order, something in me straightened. I wanted to meet that tone, to earn even a nod from him, the kind of acknowledgement that could turn a boy into a soldier. The next morning came with punishment disguised as exercise. Push-ups in the mud, sprints until the world blurred. I tried to keep pace, lungs begging for mercy when I heard Harris behind me. "Keep your back straight, Reed." I stiffened, tried harder, failed again. My arms wobbled like jelly. In a single motion, he crouched beside me, his shadow falling over my trembling arms. "You'll injure yourself like that," he said, tone quieter now. "Here, like this." His hands adjusted my shoulders, one palm firm between my blades, the other guiding my elbow forward. The contact was professional, or at least it should have been, but my pulse didn't care for regulations. His skin was rough, warm through the fabric, and his breath brushed the side of my neck as he leaned closer. "There," he murmured. "Feel the balance?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure what balance he meant anymore. He stood, leaving me to the echo of that brief touch. "Don't rush strength," he said. "It comes quietly." When he walked away, I realized I'd been holding my breath the whole time. The rest of the day unfolded in a haze. The drills, the orders, the mud, all blurred together, anchored only by the memory of his voice. By nightfall, the barracks smelled of sweat and soap, men collapsing into bunks like falling trees. I lay on my cot staring at the ceiling, muscles screaming in revolt. Someone cracked a joke about Harris being born without a smile. Laughter rippled through the dark, and yet I found myself defending him silently. He didn't need to smile. His calm was its own language. I rolled onto my side, pulling the coarse blanket higher, pretending I wasn't waiting to hear his footsteps outside, or the distant call of his voice in another drill. It was absurd. I'd known him less than 48 hours, but something about him made the air heavier, the world sharper. Maybe it was respect. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was something else entirely, embodying something I wasn't ready to name. The wind rattled the barrack windows. My body begged for sleep, but my mind replayed the morning. His touch, his words, that steady calm I couldn't shake. I pressed my hand to the same spot between my shoulders where his had rested, and the ghost of warmth there made me feel alive, in a way the army never promised. I didn't know what this was or why it mattered so much. But as I finally closed my eyes, one truth pulsed beneath the fatigue, quiet but insistent. I didn't know why his voice stayed with me after lights out, but it did. If the first week at Fort Ravenhill had tested my limits, the second week dragged me past them. My arms ached in places I didn't know existed. My palms were blistered and raw, and every sunrise brought another set of orders shouted across the training yard. Harris was relentless. He pushed harder than anyone else, not cruelly, but with the kind of precision that didn't allow excuses. To him, mistakes weren't punished. They were repeated until perfection felt like mercy. "Reed," he'd bark across the field. "You think hesitation wins wars? No, sir." "Then stop thinking. Move." The other recruits laughed under their breath. I was the newest, the slowest, the one still figuring out how to march in rhythm. Every stumble felt like a spotlight, and every correction from Harris felt both humiliating and grounding. There was something in the way he looked at me, not with disappointment but with patience, as if he could see beyond my fumbling present into the soldier I might become. But patience didn't earn me friends. By midweek, I'd become the camp's favorite joke. "Hey, Reed," one of them said one night in the mess hall. "The sergeant wipe your tears after drills too?" Laughter erupted around the table. I tried to ignore it, but heat crawled up my neck. "Careful," another chimed in. "Don't let Harris hear you. He'll have you running laps until sunrise." I forced a smile, pretending it didn't sting. Pretending I didn't care that maybe, just maybe, they were half right. Because sometimes, when I caught Harris watching from across the yard, I couldn't tell if it was supervision or something else. His gaze lingered just a fraction longer than it needed to. It wasn't warm exactly, but it wasn't cold either. It was aware. And when our eyes met, the air between us tightened, thin as a thread pulled too far. I told myself it was respect. He was my superior. I wanted to impress him, that was all. That strange pull in my chest when he was near, that was adrenaline, not attraction. It had to be. But one night, everything I'd been trying to suppress started to unravel. The rain had been falling for hours, drumming hard against the tin roof of the barracks. Most of the men were asleep or pretending to be, muttering curses into their pillows. I couldn't rest. My mind buzzed with thoughts I didn't want to think. The day's failures, the sergeant's voice, the way his hand had brushed my shoulder during inspection that morning, so I slipped out. The rain soaked through my shirt instantly as I made my way to the equipment shed. The scent of oil and iron was comforting, sharp and familiar. I sat on a bench, rifle laid across my knees, and began cleaning it by lamplight. The steady rhythm of it calmed me. Wipe, check, polish, reload. It was something I could control when everything else, and especially my thoughts, refused to be tamed. I didn't hear him approach until his voice broke through the rain. "Reed." My heart jumped. I turned and there he was. Sergeant Harris, his coat dark with rain, face half shadowed by the dim light. "Sir," I stammered, standing at once. "I couldn't sleep, so I—" "Sit," he interrupted, stepping closer. "I know what you're doing." I hesitated but obeyed. He took off his cap, set it on the table, and for a moment just looked at me. The rain beat harder on the roof, echoing the pulse in my chest. "You've been running yourself into the ground," he said finally. "You think I don't see it?" "I'm just trying to keep up, sir." His jaw flexed, like he was choosing his words carefully. "You don't have to prove yourself to me." That sentence landed heavier than I expected. For a long moment I couldn't look at him. My throat felt tight, and the words I wanted to say tangled somewhere between pride and gratitude. When I did look up, his eyes met mine, steady, searching. It wasn't the gaze of a commanding officer checking a soldier's posture. It was something else, something raw, the kind of look that sees too much and says nothing. Lightning flashed outside, briefly lighting the room. For that second I saw him clearly, the tired lines on his face, the raindrops clinging to his hair, the quiet weight in his eyes. "I just don't want to fail," I said softly. "You won't," he replied. His voice dropped lower, almost tender. "You're harder on yourself than anyone else ever could be." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was thick with something unspoken. His gaze didn't waver. Mine couldn't. There was no rank in that moment, no uniform, no walls. Just two people, both hiding behind discipline, both too afraid to name what they felt. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "Get some rest, Reed." "Yes, sir." He reached for his cap, paused for a heartbeat as if to say more, then turned and left. The door closed behind him, the rain swallowing the sound of his boots. I sat there, the rifle forgotten, my pulse echoing the storm. I told myself again that it was just respect, that the way he looked at me didn't mean anything. But when I closed my eyes, all I could see was that flash of lightning, and the way his gaze had burned through the shadows straight into me. By the third week, fatigue stopped being a feeling. It became a language my body spoke fluently. Every morning my muscles screamed, my vision blurred halfway through drills, and still I forced myself forward. I wanted to be more than the struggling recruit everyone joked about. I wanted Harris to see me as capable, as someone worth believing in. The endurance test was supposed to be my redemption. A 5-mile run with full gear under the beating sun, followed by a climb up the obstacle tower. Easy on paper, brutal in reality. By mile 3, my lungs felt like they'd turned to fire. My legs buckled under the weight of my pack and sweat poured into my eyes. Around me, the others surged ahead, machines disguised as men. Harris watched from a distance with his usual calm, clipboard in hand, eyes following every movement. I kept pushing, just one more step. When I reached the tower, I was already shaking. The wooden beams seemed to stretch endlessly upward. Halfway up, my grip slipped. Once, twice, swung, and then my boot lost traction. I fell the last few feet hard, landing on my back. The wind punched out at me. "Reed," someone shouted, but before I could respond, the other officer, Lieutenant Bran, was there. His voice cut sharper than the fall. "Pathetic," he snapped. "You think we have room for quitters here? You think the enemy's going to wait for you to catch your breath?" My chest heaved, dirt sticking to the sweat on my face. I tried to get up, but my legs wouldn't listen. "Get on your feet, soldier." Harris's voice came next, low, steady, but carrying weight like thunder. "That's enough, Lieutenant." Bran turned, jaw tightening. "He fell during a simple climb, Sergeant." "The boy's not fit for field work." Harris stepped forward. "He's exhausted, not weak. There's a difference." Something in his tone silenced the yard. Even Bran blinked, caught off guard. "Reed," Harris said then, his voice directed at me now. "Take 5. Get checked out by med. That's an order." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and stumbled away while whispers followed me like shadows. No one had ever seen Sergeant Harris defend anyone, let alone me. That night, while the others joked and bragged about their times, I sat on my bunk, staring at the floor. My pride hurt worse than my bruised back. I'd failed. Again. And the only thing worse than the failure itself was knowing Harris had to witness it. The rain had returned by evening, tapping against the barrack windows like impatient fingers. Just as I started to drift into a restless half-sleep, the door creaked open. "Reed." His voice, deep, unmistakable. I shot upright. Harris stood in the doorway, his uniform jacket unbuttoned, sleeves rolled to his forearms. The low lamplight caught the tired lines around his eyes. "Sir, office now." I followed him across the corridor, heart pounding so hard I could barely hear the rain anymore. His office was small. A desk, 2 chairs, a single photo on the wall of soldiers much younger than him, smiling like they hadn't seen what he had. He gestured for me to sit. "How's your back?" "It's fine," I muttered. "I'm fine." He leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "That's not what I asked." Silence. My throat tightened. The words stuck somewhere between shame and exhaustion. Finally, I said quietly, "I let you down." His brows furrowed. "Me?" I stared at my hands. "You've spent weeks trying to make something out of me, and I still can't do a damn climb without falling." "Reed, I just—" The words tumbled out faster now, messy, unfiltered. "I don't even know why it matters so much. What you think of me, I mean. It shouldn't matter, but it does. Every time you look at me like I'm capable, I start to believe it. And then I screw it up again." The air thickened between us. He didn't interrupt, didn't move, just listened, his blue eyes steady in the dim light. "I feel lost here," I admitted, voice breaking. "Like everyone else knows what they're doing, and I'm pretending. And I don't know why I keep chasing your approval like it's the only thing keeping me upright." The rain outside grew louder. Harris's expression softened, the steel in his posture giving way to something human, He exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. "You remind me of someone," he said finally. "A long time ago." "Who?" "Myself." He gave a small, tired smile. "I used to think I could outwork my doubts too. Thought if I trained harder, fought longer, I'd quiet the noise in my head. But war doesn't care how hard you try, it just takes piece by piece. Eventually, you forget what you were fighting for." He looked down at his hands, scarred, steady but trembling slightly at the edges. "You've still got the fire I lost a long time ago." Something in my chest shifted, fragile and overwhelming all at once. I wanted to say something, anything, but words felt too small for the moment. He reached out, placing his hand on the desk between us, fingers brushing the edge of mine. The contact was accidental and maybe, but neither of us moved. The warmth of his skin bled into mine and the silence stretched, filled only by the sound of the rain and two uneven heartbeats trying to keep rhythm. When our eyes met, there was no rank between us, no walls, just two men stripped down to truth. He withdrew his hand first, clearing his throat. "You've got more in you than you think, Reed. Don't let today tell you otherwise." I nodded, unable to trust my voice. As I stood to leave, the lamplight flickered, throwing shadows across his face. For a second, he looked younger, almost vulnerable, like the man he might have been before time and duty hardened him. And in that quiet, something wordless passed between us, a recognition, a shared ache. A forbidden understanding neither of us dared to name. Something in his eyes told me that I wasn't the only one fighting something I couldn't name. The next few days moved in uneasy silence. Harris and I went back to our roles, sergeant and recruit, like nothing had happened in that dimly lit office. He gave orders, I followed them. He corrected my form, I nodded. But under the surface, something had changed. It wasn't what he'd said. It was what he hadn't. The look in his eyes that night had unsettled me more than any reprimand could. For the first time since arriving at Ravenhill, I didn't just want to impress him. I wanted to understand him. The chance came sooner than either of us expected. It was supposed to be a routine drill, obstacle relay with full gear. We'd run it 100 times before, but the morning was slick with rain and the ground turned to mud faster than anyone anticipated. During the second lap, I heard a yell, sharp, panicked. A recruit ahead of me, Miller, had slipped from the wall and landed badly. His leg twisted beneath him and the sound it made was sickening. Chaos broke out instantly, men shouting for medics, others frozen mid-action. Without thinking, I dropped my rifle and sprinted forward. My boots sank deep into the mud, water splashing up my legs, but all I could focus on was getting to him. Miller was pale, gasping, trying to move his leg. "Don't," I said, crouching beside him. "Stay still." "You'll make it worse," he grimaced, pain twisting his face. The drill field blurred around us, voices, footsteps, the smell of rain and panic. I pulled off my jacket, folded it, and slid it under his head to keep it off the wet ground. Someone shouted my name, but I barely heard them. When Harris arrived seconds later, I already had Miller stabilized. "Med team's on the way," Harris said, kneeling opposite me. His tone was calm, measured. The voice of someone who'd seen real emergencies and knew panic was useless. Our eyes met briefly through the downpour. For a heartbeat, there was something like pride in his expression. Not the kind you show to a soldier for following orders, but the kind that means something deeper. When the medics finally took Miller away, Harris ordered the others back into formation. Then he turned to me, voice low but steady. "You did good, Reed." I was still breathing hard, mud streaked up my arms. "Just did what anyone would have done, sir." "No," he said quietly. "Not anyone." The words hit harder than I expected. That evening, after the rain stopped and the field lights glowed like faded stars, he found me again, by the benches near the training yard. I was wiping the mud off my boots when I saw his shadow stretch across the ground. "Sergeant," I said quickly, half standing. "Relax," he murmured. "Not here to lecture you." He sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders almost brushed. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of crickets and distant footsteps. "I saw what you did today," he said after a moment. "You didn't hesitate," I shrugged. "Didn't have time to think." "That's the point," he said. "Most men freeze when things go wrong. You didn't." I didn't know what to say to that. Compliments from Harris were rare, precious like metals he didn't hand out easily. I nodded, staring at the dirt between my boots. Then he said something that made me look up. You remind me of the man I used to want to be." The words came out soft, almost reluctant, like they'd been waiting too long to be spoken. I turned to him. "What do you mean?" He looked ahead, eyes unfocused, jaw tightening like he was holding something back. There was a time I thought courage was about being the loudest, the toughest. Then the years passed. The noise faded, the faces changed, and I realized I'd built walls so high even I couldn't see over them. He paused, exhaled. "You've still got that fire I buried." The part of me that believed in something, my chest tightened. I didn't know whether to thank him or ask him to stop, because every word he spoke pulled something loose inside me. "I'm not special, sir," I managed. "I'm just trying not to mess up." He gave a small, weary laugh. "That's exactly what I mean." The night air felt heavier. I could feel him beside me, solid, quiet, unguarded in a way I'd never seen before. For once there was no rank between us, no audience, no need for orders. Just two men who had spent too long pretending they didn't feel anything at all. My voice came out before I could stop it. "You make me want to be seen." Even when I shouldn't. The words hung there, fragile, dangerous. Harris turned his head slowly. His eyes caught the faint light from the field lamps, soft, uncertain, full of something I didn't dare name. For a long time he didn't speak. Then he whispered, "You already are." The world seemed to narrow around that moment. The hum of the night, the warmth of his nearness, the quiet truth stretching between us. He reached up, hesitated, then brushed his thumb lightly against my cheek. The gesture was careful, almost reverent, as if he were testing whether the moment itself was real. His hand lingered there, a touch that wasn't about claiming or comforting, but about recognition. My pulse thundered, but neither of us moved. I could feel the tremor in his fingertips. The same man who had shouted orders across the field now touching me like I was something fragile. For a second, I thought he might pull away, retreat behind that wall again. But he didn't. He whispered, "You should get some rest." I nodded, unable to form words. Slowly he dropped his hand, the warmth fading with it, leaving my skin cold in the night air. When I stood, he stayed seated, staring out into the darkness like he was trying to memorize it. I wanted to thank him, or maybe confess something more, that the way he looked at me made me believe I wasn't invisible anymore. But instead I just said, "Good night, sir." He didn't answer right away. Then softly, so softly I almost missed it, he said, "Good night, Jony." My name, spoken without rank. As I walked back to the barracks, my chest ached in a way that wasn't pain. It was something deeper, a pull between fear and longing, discipline and desire. And even though nothing had been said outright, I knew that a line had been crossed, not the kind written in manuals, but the kind drawn in the quiet space between two people who had finally stopped pretending they didn't care. That night, as I lay awake, I touched my cheek where his hand had been, and it felt like the only part of me still burning in the dark. The sky above Ravenhill that night was too quiet. No drills, no shouting, no orders, just the low hum of the generators and the endless sprawl of stars stretching across the dark. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Harris's face, the way he'd looked at me by the benches, the way my name had sounded in his voice. I'd spent hours turning it over in my head, trying to bury it under logic, rank, rules, but it refused to die. When I stepped outside the barracks, the air was cold enough to bite. The field lamps had dimmed and the night smelled like damp soil and burnt fuel. That's when I saw him. Harris stood a few yards away near the edge of the training yard, his hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the stars. The faint light caught the lines of his face, weary, distant, yet somehow softer than I'd ever seen them. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to turn back, to keep whatever fragile piece we had left. But another part, the one that had started to believe in something unnamed, pulled me forward. He didn't turn when I stopped beside him. Couldn't sleep either. I asked quietly. He gave a small shake of his head. Didn't try. For a while, neither of us said anything. The night stretched wide and weightless between us. "You ever wonder," he said finally, "why people look at the stars when they're lonely?" I glanced up. The constellations blurred slightly, maybe from the cold, maybe from everything inside me trying not to spill out. Maybe because they're the only things that don't change. He huffed a quiet, humorless laugh. Or maybe because they're too far away to hurt us. There was something raw in his tone, not the voice of a soldier or a leader, but of a man who'd spent too many nights alone. I don't think distance helps, I said softly. You can still miss something even when you've never had it. He turned to look at me, then really look. The wind brushed against us, carrying the faint scent of pine and rain. His eyes searched mine for a long moment, and whatever he found there seemed to unravel something in him. You shouldn't be here, he said. But it came out more like a plea than an order. I know. Then why are you? I swallowed. My voice barely worked. Because I can't stop thinking about you. The words felt dangerous, like stepping into fire. He exhaled slowly, gaze falling to the ground. Jony, I've tried, I said, my voice trembling. I've tried to ignore it, to tell myself it's just respect or... I stopped, shaking my head. But every time you look at me, it feels like you see something I can't hide. And I don't know what to do with that anymore. He looked up again, eyes shadowed with conflict. For a moment I thought he'd walk away, but instead he took a step closer. The distance between us disappeared until I could feel the warmth of his breath against the cold air. You think I don't feel it too? He said quietly. You think I don't lie awake fighting the same damn thing? My heart pounded. Then why fight it? Because I'm supposed to know better. His voice cracked, the first time I'd ever heard it falter. Because this and whatever this is isn't allowed. And because the last thing I want is to ruin you the way this place ruined me. You could never ruin me, I whispered. The silence that followed was fragile, the kind that could shatter with one wrong breath. Then with a quiet resignation he said, You make me remember I'm still human. Something in me broke open. I stepped closer. Not enough to cross the line, but enough for him to feel that I would if he asked. He didn't move away. His hand twitched slightly as though he wanted to reach for me but didn't trust himself to. I don't want you to forget that, I said. Not because of me. Because you deserve to remember. His eyes softened, the kind of softness that carried both pain and longing. Slowly, almost uncertainly, he lifted his hand. When his fingers brushed mine, it felt like the world stilled. Every heartbeat between us was louder than the night. He traced his thumb along the back of my hand, tentative, reverent. It wasn't possession, it was recognition. The touch of someone who had spent years denying himself warmth and had finally found it again. I didn't pull away. When he finally cupped my face, his palm was rough and warm against my cheek. The air seemed to disappear. I could feel his breath, hear the small, broken exhale he tried to hide. He leaned in, and for one suspended moment, we just existed there. Two people standing too close, hearts beating in rhythm, both terrified and desperate to feel something real. When our foreheads touched, it felt like coming home to a place neither of us had ever seen before. No words, no rules. Just quiet understanding, the kind that doesn't need permission. His hand slid to the back of my neck, grounding me, anchoring me in a world that had always felt too uncertain. I let my eyes close, breathing him in, the scent of rain, smoke, and something entirely his. He didn't kiss me, not really. Our lips barely met, a ghost of a touch, more a confession than an act. But it carried everything we hadn't said. Fear, hunger, the relief of being seen. When he pulled back, his forehead still rested against mine. What are we doing? He whispered. Something we probably shouldn't, I murmured. But I don't regret it, neither did he. I could see it in the way his eyes softened, in the way his thumb traced the edge of my jaw like he was memorizing it. For a long time, we stayed like that, breathing the same cold air, holding on to a moment we both knew couldn't last. When he finally stepped back, the loss of his warmth was almost painful. Go get some sleep, Jony, he said softly. I nodded, though I didn't move. You'll still be here when I wake up? He hesitated, then smiled. Small, tired, but real. I'll try. As I turned to leave, I looked back once more. He was still there, staring at the stars like he was trying to remember how to hope. And for the first time since I'd met him, I didn't see the sergeant everyone feared. I saw the man beneath the uniform, lonely, scarred, but still capable of warmth. That night, lying awake, I replayed the feeling of his hand against my skin. Not as temptation, but as proof that somewhere in this cold, unrelenting place, two broken people had managed, if only for a moment, to find something human. The morning after that night, the world looked exactly the same. Gray sky, wet dirt, drills echoing through the camp. But something inside me had changed. Harris and I didn't speak. Not in words, anyway. During formation, he called out orders like nothing had happened, his voice even, steady, unreadable. I kept my eyes straight ahead, afraid that one glance might give everything away. For the next few days, we moved through our routines like ghosts. The distance between us felt unbearable but necessary. It was a silent pact, to protect what had happened by pretending it never did. Still, people noticed. Whispers started. Nothing direct, just quiet looks, half smiles from the other recruits when Harris corrected my stance or handed me an assignment. Sergeant's favorite. Someone muttered again and I laughed it off, but my chest burned. At night, I'd lie awake listening to the rain hit the tin roof, wondering if he was doing the same. Wondering if he regretted it, if he wished that moment under the stars had never happened. By the fourth day, I couldn't take the silence anymore. I started packing my things after lights out, not officially, just enough to make myself believe I still had control. Maybe I thought if I left first, I could protect him from the fallout that never really came. Maybe I was running from my own heart. That's when I heard the door creak open. Going somewhere? His voice, quiet, calm, but laced with something heavy. I froze, then turned. Harris stood in the doorway, the low light from the corridor outlining his broad shoulders. He looked tired, older somehow, but softer too, I thought. I swallowed. It might be easier if I transferred. For both of us. He stepped into the room, his boots barely making a sound. You think walking away makes it easier? I didn't answer. He looked at my half-packed bag, then at me. You didn't do anything wrong, Jony. I almost laughed at that. Didn't I? He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. We crossed a line, yes. But it wasn't wrong, it was human. The word lingered between us like a fragile truth. I don't know how to be around you anymore, I admitted. Every time I hear your voice, I remember that night. And I keep thinking that it shouldn't have happened. He finished, I met his gaze. That I don't want it to end like this. He took a slow step closer, and suddenly the air between us felt heavy again. Not with desire this time, but with everything we couldn't say. Jony, he said quietly. Whatever this was, it made me better. It made me honest. I don't know what that means for either of us, but I'm not sorry for it. I felt my throat tighten. So what do we do now? He gave a faint, sad smile. We do what soldiers always do. We carry it, quietly. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he reached out, hesitating for just a second before resting his hand on my shoulder. It was a simple touch, but it said everything. Gratitude, affection, restraint. I'm proud of you, he said softly. Not just as a soldier, as a man. My chest ached with everything I couldn't say back. That he'd taught me more about courage than any drill ever could. That he'd made me believe being seen didn't have to mean being weak. When he stepped back, the space between us felt permanent. The next morning, training resumed as always. Orders barked, rifles fired, boots hit the ground. Harris's voice cut through the air, firm and distant again. But when our eyes met for the briefest moment, something unspoken passed between us. A quiet promise that neither time nor distance could erase. That night, I wrote in my journal, some lessons aren't about war or discipline. Some are about learning how to feel without falling apart. Sergeant Harris taught me both, and even though I knew we'd never speak of it again, I carried his words and his silence with me long after I left Ravenhill. Because some connections, no matter how forbidden, don't fade. They live quietly inside you, not as regret, but as remembrance of the moment you were finally seen. A year can change a man. I used to think time dulled everything, memories, feelings, even the sharp edges of regret. But it didn't dull this. It only softened it into something I could live with, something I could smile about. When I returned to Ravenhill for the veterans event, I almost didn't recognize it. The parade ground was freshly painted, the barracks cleaned, flags fluttering under a forgiving blue sky. It didn't smell like sweat and iron anymore. It smelled like spring. I had been invited back as a guest instructor. Not a recruit, not a student, a trainer. A man with his own stories, his own rookies to look after. Yet as I walked across the familiar dirt paths, I still felt that same nervousness in my chest. Because I knew he might be here. I hadn't heard from Sergeant Harris since I left. No letters, no calls, no chance meetings. It was as if we'd both silently agreed that our connection had to live in memory. Private, untouchable and safe. But when I turned toward the far end of the field, I saw him, standing near the flagpole, in a light gray coat, hands folded behind his back. The hair that had once been dark was now touched with silver, and his posture, though still proud, carried a gentleness I hadn't seen before. For a moment, I just watched him, every muscle in my body frozen with disbelief and something dangerously close to joy. Then, as if he could sense me, he turned, and he smiled. That same small, knowing smile I had memorized under the stars a lifetime ago. "Sergeant," I said as I approached, though the title felt almost foreign now. He chuckled. "Not anymore. Retired officially. Just Harris now." "Still suits you," I said. He looked me over, the new uniform, the confident stance, and nodded approvingly. "You've changed. So have you." We stood there for a moment, just taking each other in. The noise of the event, the laughter, the speeches, the music, faded into the background until there was only us. "Walk with me?" he asked. I nodded. We wandered toward the perimeter trail, the same one we used to run during drills. The grass had grown wild along the fence line, and the evening sun stretched long shadows across the ground. For a while, neither of us spoke. It wasn't an awkward silence, more like an old comfortable one that didn't need words to feel full. Finally, he said, "I heard you've been training recruits. They say you're tougher than I ever was." I laughed. "Maybe, but I learned from the best." He smiled at that, eyes glinting with quiet pride. "You were always meant to lead, Jony. You just didn't know it yet." We stopped near the hill overlooking the base. The wind carried the faint echo of the bugle, the last call of the evening. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and rose. Harris turned to me, his voice lower, gentler. "You taught me something too, you know." I looked at him. "What's that?" "That desire isn't weakness," he said. "It's life. It's what keeps us human." For a heartbeat, the world held still. His words were the answer I hadn't known I'd been waiting for, the acknowledgement that what we shared wasn't shame or mistake. It was truth, quietly carried through the seasons. I smiled, unable to stop it. "And you taught me something too," he raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what's that?" "That strength isn't about silence. It's about feeling everything, and still choosing to stand tall." He looked at me for a long time, eyes glistening faintly in the soft light. Then, without hesitation, he reached out. Our hands met, no longer forbidden, no longer hidden, just two people standing in the open. The world forgiving enough to let it be. The warmth of his grip was steady, familiar, grounding. I didn't need words to know that the bond between us had never really broken. It had simply waited. We stood there until the sun dipped below the horizon, painting everything in shades of amber and memory. The years between us didn't matter anymore. The ranks, the rules, the silence, and all of it faded beneath the weight of something far simpler. Love, quiet and enduring. As we turned back toward the base, his hand still resting in mine, I thought about all the lessons we'd shared, the drills, the silence, the stars, and in that golden twilight, I understood it completely. He taught me how to stand tall, but more than that, he taught me how to feel.
Thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts with us. Your feedback is very valuable and will help us improve. May I kindly ask which country you are joining us from?